Greetings everyone, my name is Rejnols and welcome back to a Custodes video where we're going to talk about all of the matchups in Warhammer 40k. This is part of a collaboration with Happy Crumbing War Gaming, or Jonny, who is, I was about to say professional player, but I suppose there aren't really any professional 40k players. In any case, he is a very skilled Warhammer player who mainly plays Orks and Custodes, and he also has a YouTube channel that you should go check out. After watching this video, of course. And on Thursday, which would be the 2nd of November, I will be joining him over on his channel for a live stream where we will talk about this video where I'm taking my guesses at the matchups, and then Jonny's gonna give his input and probably tell me why I'm wrong. So feel free to go ahead and check out his channel, there will be a link in the description. But for now, let's talk about Custodes and their matchups. So, first of all, what is the purpose of this video? The purpose of this video, as I mentioned, is in collaboration with Jonny, so he can tell me how bad I am at choosing, or rather, not choosing, but explaining why I think matchups goes the way they do. One thing to keep in mind, as I always like to say, is that I'm at best an average competitive player. I'm nowhere near a 4-1 or 5-0 kind of player. I will probably never win a grand tournament, and for me, that's okay. In any case, I do like to play competitive games because I think that's the most fun. So keep that in mind as I am giving my ratings. I am in no way or shape a top player with Custodes or any other faction for that matter. So take my opinions as you will. Finally, we will be using the WTC rating system, which means that you basically go ahead and say you have green matchups, yellow matchups, and red matchups. This might not be exclusive to WTC, but that's how I've learned about it, so I've just come to say it's a WTC system. In any case, a green matchup means that you are winning that matchup, like, let's just say 75% of the time. A yellow matchup is a bit more swingy. It can either go, more in your favor, but not as much in your favor as a green matchup, or it can be slightly in your opponent's favor. And what that entails is that it depends on the list, the mission you're playing, the terrain, those kind of things are like the more important factors, because maybe your factions are mostly even, or maybe they have a couple of units that can really counter your army, but they didn't bring it and therefore it's in your favor, those sort of things. And then red matchups are obviously bad matchups, probably things where you will just lose 75% of the time because the opponent's army is just really strong at the moment, or they tend to bring a lot of units that you have a hard time dealing with, or they can just outscore you, who knows, those kind of things. And then finally, on top of giving them green, yellow, or red, then I will also be scoring them on a 20-0 system, which is what the WTC system uses. And basically the way that works is that the amount of victory point difference between the two players determines the score. So as you can see on the image right above me here, if I, for example, have 15 victory points more than my opponent, I will score 12 points and my opponent will score 8 points. If the victory point difference was only 5, then we would both get 10 points. And then the list goes on and on and on. Now, why is pairing important? Well, in team events, you don't play traditional 40k. Or rather, you don't score in the traditional way you do at a singles tournament. Because it is the total score of your team that will determine whether or not you win the game, or sorry, the round, rather than your individual game. Because in theory, in the teams that we're playing on 5-man teams. So in theory, if 4 people on my team, they win their games 11-9, then they score us in total, 4 points, so to speak. But then the 5th player goes 0-20. That means that even though you won 4 games, because you lost that one game that big, the enemy team actually wins the round. And that is why pairing is very important in teams, because you can tailor your lists. A lot of people do this. And you can try and choose to get the best matchups to score the most amount of points as possible. So if you, for example, were to build a Custodes list that were focused on just scoring 40 primary points and 20 secondary points into every single opponent. Doesn't matter if they're Eldar, doesn't matter if they're Chaos Space Marines. What you try and do is just score as many points as possible to keep the victory point difference as low as possible. And then you go into those matchups well knowing that you will be losing, but you'll only be losing, let's say 13-7 or 14-6. In that way, the opponent's, very strong armies that could probably go 20-0 against the right opponent, now they only score 14 points. And that actually matters when you tailor up all the points at the end. And that is why pairing is very important. I'm not going to go into super details about how exactly it works, but basically you choose attackers and then you choose defenders, and defenders are chosen against the attackers, and it's a whole system. We can talk about that another time. Just know that it is very important for team events, but it is also a fairly decently good exercise for yourself to do with your own faction. Go through all of the other factions in the game and be like, what is realistically when I go into this army? Do I win this? Do I lose this? What are my weaknesses? What are their strengths? Those kind of things. It's a very good exercise. Alright, with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Our first faction matchup is the Eldari. They are the boogeymen of 10th edition. I have marked them for Custodes as a red matchup, and I've given the score of 4 to 16. This means that I will score 4 points and my opponent will score 16 in the average Eldari game. Now, why do I think this? Well, Eldari had a lot of the big guns with Wraith Knights and their death wounds, which are nerfed now because they can only ever kill a single model, but they still have access to death wounds on various other units, which is obviously quite good against Custodes because we no longer have a save against devastating wounds. On top of that, the Night Spinners alone giga nerf Custodes because Custodes really only have one way of going forward, and that is moving and charging. You do have a little bit of, rapid ingressing and teleporting, but overall, like 90% of your movement is rolling that dice on the advance or the charge roll. And the Night Spinner just makes it so you straight up cannot advance, and you get -2 on your movement. So that's pretty fucking bad. Then there's also the Fate dice. It can always give them the result that they might need. Let's say they have a multiple damage roll and they just need to kill something for sure. Well, there you go. That kills it. Or, oh, I need to make this save to keep the unit alive. And whoop, would you look at that? Then there's the fact that while Eldari are glass cannon and can be killed by, normal bolters, Custodes don't exactly have a lot of small guns to shoot, so we almost always trade poorly into Eldari because we need to overkill them. Well, we don't need to overkill them, but we end up overkilling them because our small units start at 250 points. And so when we go in and kill one unit, yes, we killed that unit, we obliterated it, but now they can just use another small unit and probably do equal, if not better damage into us, and then it's just like, it's a bad trade most of the time. My experience into Eldari in 10th edition is quite limited. I've only played against like a Harlequin plus Avatar Incarn list, and while Harlequins are, not great, gunboats are still fine. Troops doesn't do anything, but they can move around quite fast, they can do secondaries, they can take objectives, and the Avatar and the Incarn are just, whoa, they're really good. They're really, really good. So imagine that, but with something other than Harlequin troops. And then all of a sudden, that looks pretty damn scary. I do believe I lost that game like 8-12 or 9-11. The issue was that I couldn't stop his Harlequins from going around and doing secondaries. And the Avatar of Cain as well as the Incarn are strong enough that they can clean up a primary objective and then just force me off of it. So I think that's where I lose, or where I lost that specific game. But as I was saying, let's imagine you have the Incarn, maybe an Avatar of Cain, Night Spinners, the Warp Spiders, I think they're called. And if you just look at all the good stuff Eldari can have all of a sudden, if you don't take Harlequins, I just think it's a very, very poor matchup for Custodes in general. Moving on, we have the Drukhari, and this is probably flip-sided of the Eldar, where the Eldar have a lot of tools that seem really good into Custodes. I don't think Drukhari really has any of those. I say that I don't think so because I have absolutely no experience playing into Drukhari in 10th edition. The only thing I know is that they can spam Dark Lances, which is like better melter guns, which, is fine against Custodes, but other than that, I don't see them doing anything. If shooting is the only thing they can do, which is what I think is true, I'm not sure, I think, well, in that case, I can probably just sit on primary points and, be behind terrain as much as possible so they don't get a lot of shots on me. While they can have a lot of Dark Lances, I think they also need a lot of units to carry those Dark Lances, so, it'll be like 20 whatever Dark Lance shots into a single unit, and I don't even think that's guaranteed to kill them, so, yeah, I don't know. I don't think they're great. Which is why I've said that this is a green matchup, and I would expect I score 13 points and my opponent scores 7 points. They are still elves, so they move fast, which means they can do a lot of secondaries quite easily. But I don't have any experience, so those are my short thoughts on Drukhari. Next up, we have the Leagues of Votann, and the dwarves have gotten a lot of power after the data slate, it seems like. I think the only change that really happened was points costs. And looks like that was enough, because they are up there as one of the stronger armies in the game. I am yet to play against the dwarves So I actually have no clue how terrible it is. I have marked this as being a yellow matchup because while I do believe that they have the guns to take me down, and I think the average game would be something like an 8-12 for the Votann, I do also think that they're quite slow. And again, if I can sit behind terrain on primaries and either wait for them to come to me or just completely ignore them and score as many points as possible, I think that's fine. I don't think I have to charge into these guys. They also don't have any indirect fire, so they have a hard time dealing with my Sisters of Silence. Not a hard time dealing with them, but the easy option to deal with Sisters of Silence is have, any trash unit or any indirect gun fire at them. So as long as I can use my small units, my Assassins and my Sisters of Silence to screen, I can probably hold my backfield objectives quite comfortably. If they decide to deep strike their Terminators, I forget the name of Votann Terminators, but whatever their Terminator equivalent is, well, I mean, then they're spinning a Terminator squad to go and kill my Sisters of Silence, and then I'll push up somewhere else. Or I'll rapid ingress my Venatari and take their home objective. Things like that. And yeah, I think they also have a lot of AP2 shooting and damage 2 shooting, so I can get in cover, hopefully. And then I can spend 2 CP for -1 damage, so they'll have to use a lot of their firepower to kill a single unit. Again, is what I'm thinking, because I haven't played against them. And ultimately, that's why I'm saying it's a yellow matchup. I think they have the firepower to kill me. I think I don't have enough units to deal with all their firepower. And that's why I'm saying it's a yellow matchup and an 8-12 score in favor of the Votann. Next up, we have the Tyranids. And yeah, there's a lot of different Tyranid builds at the moment. Because Tyranids got their Codex. And that is also why I've put them as a yellow matchup. Before the Codex, I probably would have given it a green matchup. But like, for real, after the Codex came out, I have serious doubts about Custodes playing into a list with 120 plus Hormagons or Termagons or whatever they're called, that respawn, that get feel no pains, that screen, that block, all these things. I just don't see how we get through it. We will kill it, but by the time we kill it, the game's over, right? We've been outscored. I also played against Monster Mash a few times. That can be pretty scary because, Exocrines, they kind of hurt. And because Custodes don't often bring all the tanks, well, I say often. We've seen quite a decent amount of lists bring tanks, and those are the lists that have the most success. But I think a lot of people are playing mostly infantry Custodes. And when you're playing mostly infantry Custodes, you need to get in melee range to take care of something like an Exocrine. But look at that, even if they didn't bring 120 Gaunts, they probably bought, 20, 30 Gaunts. And those guys need to be killed first, and they hold the objective, and they're in the way. And yeah, Tyranids is annoying. Because while you're trying your damn best to try and deal with all these big monsters and take primary points, there's a little guy shooting spore mines out going boop, 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 just scoring, infinite amount of secondary points every single turn. So my experience into Tyranids is mostly into Monster Mash, and I find that I just don't survive on objectives long enough against... So when I say Monster Mash, it's usually triple Exocrine, double the Brain Bug guys, I forget their name. It's like the Exocrine, but it has a big brain. It was very broken when the 9th edition Codex just came out. And then also the Zoanthropes with all their laser beams. And then they use the Pyrovores to remove your cover. They force Battle Shocks on you, and if you fail that Battle Shock, well damn. You can no longer use -1 damage or fight first, and now you're really screwed. Yeah, I just think Tyranids have a lot of tricks in the book that can make the matchup quite hard. And that's why I've said it's a yellow matchup. I think it's totally winnable, but I think on average, you probably have a little bit easier of a time as the Tyranids player into Custodes, and that's why I said it's an 8-12 in favor of Tyranids. Next up, we have the Necrons, and this is the one where I am the most confused, because apparently when you look at win rates, Necrons are actually below Custodes. And I know they got nerfed in the fact that they cannot revive as many times as they could before the data slate, but they can still take those big character bricks, or not character bricks, sorry, the Lichguard bricks with the Feel No Pain and the Invulns. And when I look at the Necron matchup, I'm just like, can I ever kill like a full unit? Because I don't have my 10-man brick of Custodian Guard anymore to go into their Warriors Lichguard brick, whatever it was they use. And I'm just not sure I can take them down. Like, can I pass the stat check? I don't know if Custodians can do that anymore. If they can, I think this matchup is green for sure. Otherwise, yeah, I'd probably say it's yellow because I don't expect Necrons to kill me, but if I can't kill Necrons either, then I guess it becomes like a fatigue match, and I think maybe Necrons have some capabilities of winning a game where it's just like, okay, we cannot kill each other, but I keep coming back, and eventually I will kill some of your guys. But again, I don't have any experience into them since the data slate. The only game I got against Necrons was before the data slate, and that was into a triple Catan list. And I think I won that game like 12-8 or 11-9, something like that. It was not a big victory. So yeah, I am entirely unsure of the Necrons matchup. So very much looking forward to hearing what Jonny has to say about this. Orks, 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 orks. So I believe that Jonny has stated many a times that he has an Orks list that will just completely shit on Custodes, and that may be true, but luckily I'm not playing against him. I'm playing against, well, not bad Ork players, but maybe slightly less good Ork players. Maybe. So I've said that Orks are a yellow matchup, but in the favor of Custodes. Okay, so why is there a yellow matchup? Well, first of all, holy shit, they have a lot of OC2 models that are very cheap. And holy shit, they have a lot of attacks. And then I realized, oh wait, it's probably, most likely, all of it AP1, damage 1. So what is it that Orks can do? Well, they can swarm an objective, right? They can place one of the transports on the objective, unload the boys, and then there's just physically no space for you to get on that objective. So how do you beat it? Well, you either put something on the objective and make sure they cannot get enough bodies on it before they do, or you simply stand still on the objective and don't die, which is my experience when I played against Orks. It was only a single game, but I had Valyrian in that list. That's obviously a really good counter into Orks because he gives them Armor of Contempt in melee, and then the Orks are just AP 0, and then I just have 2-up saves. I had a big squad of Terminators. I put them in the middle objective. They stood there for the rest of the game. There was nothing he could throw at them to kill them, so middle objective was just mine for the entire game. The change to Orks Wa means that they are super squishy into Custodes after the Wa turn is over. Before they would have, a 5-up invulnerable save in the Wa turn, and then a 6-up the following turn. Now they just have the 5-up, and then it's gone. And yeah, as I said, the only game I've had into them was a single game where it was like 100 boys and 30 beast snaggers, and then, 13 trucks or whatever they're called. And that list does not kill anything. That list just goes out and hopefully completely swarms the objective and does secondaries and wins the game that way. And as I said, I think that plays very much into what Custodes want to do, stand on objectives. And luckily, Custodes are more durable than Orks, so I think this slightly works in the favor of Custodes. Genestealers. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Tau Empire, also known as the pew 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 faction. I said this is a red matchup, but you might notice that I only say I lose 8-12 on average. Here's why. Shooting is obviously a threat at any point in the game. However, let's assume that you're playing on some decently fair terrain setups where you don't get shot at because you just, set up your units and you didn't go first. In which case, most likely, he cannot shoot you turn 1, or at least not a lot. And if he does get to shoot you, then he probably needs to, put units out somewhere dangerous, or at least slightly dangerous. So while the crisis suits are entirely capable of wiping a Custodes squad, and they are fast enough that they can keep out of charge range, I just think it takes the Tau just a little bit too long to make this a big victory. I don't think they can wipe us by turn 3, but they start wiping us at turn 3. And then, at turn 5, we don't have a lot left, but we've already scored the majority of our points, so we don't mind if we start dying in turn 5. And that's really what it comes down to. The crisis suits, as I said, totally capable of killing Custodian units, but I think it takes them a little bit too long if they need to get there and get line of sight. You can also use Rapid Ingress Venatari to answer the crisis suits. That being said, you will need at least 6-man Venatari suits to do actual damage into the crisis suits, so that's something to keep in mind. In any case, I only have a single game into them. I won that game 11-9 because I did manage to get a charge onto a crisis suit unit turn 2. But yeah, I think Tau are 100% capable of wiping the board with Custodians. They just take a little bit too long time to do it. And that's why I think they win, 7 out of 10 times, but they only win with 12 points. That's my reasoning. Chaos Space Marines. So Chaos Space Marines basically have our melee output, but they have better shooting because they have more options for shooting, and they have more units in general to choose from, and that means they're more flexible. Their trash units are better. The Dark Commune is somehow the most tanky unit in the game and also can deal an obscene amount of damage. They have devastating wounds, they have full rerolls, they have sustained hits on everything, they can get lethal hits on everything. They're real good. Chaos Space Marines are real good. This is a red matchup, and I say 5-15. The only redeeming thing that we have into this matchup is fight first. Because the meta right now for Chaos Space Marines is, here's a lot of Chosen, there are some scenarios we can set up where we force our opponent to take the choice between charging us, but we get to punch you first, or just don't charge us and then, waste those units while we score primary points. However, spending 2 CP for fight first and then probably also 2 CP for -1 damage in shooting or in melee becomes quite expensive, and at some point you run out of command points and then you cannot do that anymore, and then they start taking over. Because Chosen can advance, shoot, and charge all the time, as well as fall back, shoot, and charge all the time, they can be very, very out-positioned in one turn, and then be exactly where they need to be the next turn. On top of that, there is actually cases where you don't kill the Chosen unit because they have 3 wounds each, and while they do have a 3-up armor save, they spend the CP for Armor of Contempt, and then they have a 4-up save against all of our melee. And because they have 3 wounds, we need 2 wounds to kill each guy, in the end, resulting in us potentially not killing those Chosen squads. If you are making a list to, counter Chaos Space Marines, I think you need the Caladius to make the reroll strat more expensive. You need Trajan for the free fight first, and you need Valyrian for the Armor of Contempt in melee. All of those 3 characters seems like a must, in my opinion, into this matchup. And even with those, I don't think it's a winning matchup. I just think it's a much better matchup for you. And yeah, as I said above, my experience into Chaos Space Marines is pretty much what I summed up. Chosen can be somewhat circumvented by using Fight First, but they can also survive the output you put into them by using Armor of Contempt. We basically have no answers to a Forge Fiend coming in from reserves, shooting 24 inches with devastating wounds. We can't really screen that. Then you also have Obliterators that can either shoot indirect or just come down and do actions and just be super hard to remove. Nurglings for objectives as well, Chaos Cultist, Accursed Cultist. There are a lot of options in the Chaos Space Marine book, and I just don't see us being able to deal with most of those tricks at once, at least. So yeah, for me, Chaos Space Marines is a red matchup at a 5-15 towards the Chaos Space Marines. However, we do have one Chaos Space Marine green matchup, in my opinion anyway, which is Death Guard. Death Guard seems like a mirror matchup in some ways, because while Death Guard has some indirect firing with the plague mortar guns, I think they're called. What are they called? Plague mortar crawlers? Plague crawlers? I forget their name. The tanks that shoot indirect. It's not really that scary. Of course, the indirect fire can kill Sisters of Silence. But the rest of it is just, slow-moving melee units that want to get into combat to proc their -1 toughness and various army effects, such as -1 to hit and wound or whatever it is. And for Custodes, that sounds pretty fine, We aren't exactly a fast army ourselves, but we are faster than Death Guard. And in general, we are pretty good at killing Marines, which, Death Guard, they are Marines. So the regular toughness 4 or toughness 5, it doesn't actually matter for us if they're toughness 4 or toughness 5, shouldn't really be an issue. Mortarion is very nasty. That guy hits hard. We cannot use -1 to wound on the Wardens on him, and we cannot use -1 damage on him either, because he will ignore those with his aura. But other than him, I don't really think there's anything too scary, and I think we're very much playing the same game. We want to try and dominate on the primary front and then score as many secondaries as we can. And I just think Custodes can do it better, and that's why I'm saying it's a green matchup and a 15-5 for Custodes. Next up, we have the Thousand Suns, and for my next trick, I will make your armor save disappear. I'm saying this is a yellow matchup, 7-13 in favor of the Thousand Suns. They are a shooting-focused army that can reliably keep their distance and still do their stuff, right? They can still go where they need to go, do what they need to do. They have Scary Flamers if you get too close. They also have Psychic Shooting with rerolls when you get too close. And again, if you want to take care of them as Custodes, you generally need to get in melee. They are Marines, so it is possible to shoot them to death. But our shooting is generally AP1, and you get cover a lot in 10th edition. So we're really making them save on 3s and not on 4s. And that means that you cannot really expect for, let's say, a Warden squad shooting into Rubric squad that you wipe the squad. And you probably kill 1 or 2. They also have the powerful effect of being able to turn off your armor save. And that's really bad, because you know what's scary when you don't have an armor save? Literally everything. At least we still have a 4-up invulnerable save, but it's still pretty scary when they shoot, 40 boulder shots into you and you have 4-ups. That means you fail 20 of them on average. That means they kill a Warden squad on average if you don't have the Feel No Pains as well. On top of that, because rubrics have that rule, they get rerolls when you're standing on objectives, and can you guess what Custodes like to do? It's standing on objectives. It's also one of those that feels quite hard to trade up into, because yes, I can absolutely demolish a rubric squad if I charge them, but I just charge them with, 275 points plus a character, let's just say 400 points of models, and I've killed 150? 180 maybe? In any case, if I want to go into melee with them, I feel like I'm trading down most of the time. And then you can probably argue that, just don't go in melee with them. And I guess that's a viable option sometimes. But it does, for me, feel like a hard matchup. My experience is I've played a fair few games, I want to say 5 or 6 into Thousand Suns, and I think I've won 1 or 2 of those games. Both of those games were when I got a 9-inch deep strike with like the Alaris or my Venatari, or if I was able to deep strike and shoot at the rubric squads with a character in them with my Terminators. Because if you remove a couple units of rubrics, then the Thousand Suns player starts having an issue dealing enough damage to reliably kill your Custodes units. But it's getting those, I don't want to say alpha strikes, but getting those early hits on the army is what's gonna put you ahead in my experience. That being said, I still think it is in the Thousand Suns favor, but it's totally winnable. I am very, very sure about that. In general, I would say it's a 7-13 in favor of the Thousand Suns. World Eaters. Well, really quickly go through this one because I don't have a ton to say. I said there are a yellow matchup, but in our favor. I say there are yellow matchup because one of the few armies in 10th edition that can still Alpha Strike is World Eaters. They get scout moves, they just move really fast in general, they can get advanced and charge with the Blessings of Khorne. And if you get slightly unlucky and they get in your face turn 1, you don't have enough CP to fight first, you don't have enough CP to -1 damage. And if they get enough in your face, well, they have a decent amount of attacks and they're fairly strong, so they could totally pick some units up in turn 1. And I mean, if you lose a Custodian unit turn 1 before they get to do anything, the way we pay for Custodian units right now, that kind of means the game's just over. Because chances are that was a 250 point unit with a character, so more like a 400 point unit. So you just start the game with 1600 points instead. And you have who knows how many World Eaters in your deployment zone you need to deal with before you can start going out to objectives and scoring points. So yeah, I think there are games where the World Eaters kind of just win because they roll good on the advance, or rather they get the advance in charge and then roll good. But I also think if we're looking at, an average game, I think the Custodes have a slight advantage in that we have Fight First, which is very strong against World Eaters, just in the same way as it's good against Chaos Space Marines or regular Chaos Space Marines. But World Eaters don't have the shooting or, flexible units in the same way that Chaos Space Marine does. And that's why I think it is more in our favor. And yeah, my experience into them is that I've played a few games, and melee is the Custodes, favor. And while World Eaters can get a similar amount of output, it's not quite the same, and we can answer it with -1 damage, or fighting first, or being -1 to hit. We have those options to kinda counter their output. Meanwhile, they don't really have an answer to counter our output outside of getting a 6+ Feel No Pain. But if they're getting the Feel No Pain, then they're not getting sustained hits or advance and charge. So they can either be a little bit more tanky, but slower, or they can be fast and tanky, but not have the same amount of output. So yeah, in general, I would say World Eaters is a yellow matchup, 12-8 in the favor of Custodes. Next up, we have Chaos Demons, and this is our first green matchup in quite a while. And the reason why I say that this is a green matchup is that I think Chaos Demons are suffering from a bit of the same issue that Custodes are right now. And that is that the only viable list for Chaos Demons seem to be a few big demons, and then a couple of small demon units and lone operatives to play the mission. And if that sounds familiar, that's because that's the same situation Custodes are in. In Custodes, you're generally looking at 3 or maybe 4 larger units of Custodians, and then a bunch of small flexible units and assassins to play the mission. And Custodes are probably at their best when they get to trade evenly, because our units are so expensive. So if I can get to put one of my units into one of these big demons that are also, 350 plus points or whatever, that is a win for me, because chances are that the big demon does not have the output to kill my Custodes, but my Custodes have the output to kill the big demon. I only have a single game against demons. In that game, I got a 9-inch charge with my Alaris turn 1 into Be'lakor and killed him, but then my Terminators died to the named Keeper of Secrets. Slashy? I don't remember. The Keeper of Secrets that gets full rerolls against character units. And then the Shooty Bird also killed them. So in general, I lost probably more points than he did, but I killed Be'lakor turn 1, and the rest of the game was basically just, here's my Custodes unit against your demon, who wins. Oh, look at that, I won, but then I lost here, and blah, blah, blah. I totally think Chaos Demons is Custodes' favorite matchup, if played correctly. Chaos Knights, also known as Kool-Aid Man, because they do be running through walls. I say that this is a green matchup, much for the same reasons as I did the Chaos Demon matchup. I think that they're generally going to be throwing 1 or 2 War Dogs at any one unit of ours at a time. And while a War Dog certainly can kill a couple of Custodians, I don't think they pick up a full squad. Whereas I feel fairly confident in one Custodian unit killing 1 War Dog or 1 Brigand every time they activate. Yeah, if we get to take them on, 1 at a time in melee, I think we're fine. However, I do believe that the War Dog spam is like 12 or 13 of those guys on the board at the same time. And that does mean that we don't get to kill all of their big stuff at once, which will most likely result in them scoring more points. That is why I say it's a green matchup, but I only think it's a 12-8 in general, because I don't see us killing all of those small knights running around the board before they get to score a couple of points. That being said, I don't have any experience playing against Chaos Knights in 10th edition, so I cannot say for sure. Alright, we are done with Chaos and Xenos, and now moving into Imperium. Starting off with the Space Marines, and they got a lot of new toys in the Codex. I am saying that currently this is a yellow matchup, and it's a 10-10 score. I'm not sure why it says... I must have had a stroke when I was typing. And you might be like, huh, that seems weird. What do you mean Space Marines have a 10-10? Well, I am assuming that my opponent is showing up with what I would consider to be a meta Space Marine army. And let me tell you about the new things that Space Marines can do with the new Codex. So they can roll up in a Land Reader Redeemer, which by the way has some nasty ass flamers that does very well into Custodes. And if you shoot at that Land Raider for whatever reason, let's just say you want to plink a few wounds off of it before you charge it, the Land Raider lets out whatever is inside them. Maybe, it's Eradicators, or maybe it's Stern Guard veterans, who the fuck knows, jumps out and they get to shoot you, and now you're taking devastating wounds because they also get a strat for that. If you're playing against the Salamanders detachment. If you're playing against the Iron Hands detachment, you get the fun of playing against the unkillable Redemptor Dreadnought. Why is the Redemptor Dreadnought unkillable for Custodes? Let me tell you why. So the new Iron Hands detachment has a stratagem that you use at the start of the command phase, and it lasts until the player's next command phase. So it's both in his turn and his opponent's turn. And that stratagem gives the Dreadnought +1 strength, +1 toughness, and +1 save, as well as +1 move and +1 OC. The thing that matters the most for us is the +1 toughness, the +1 save, because it goes from a 2-up save to a 1-up save. Alright. Did I also mention that the Redemptor Dreadnought has built-in -1 damage? Oh yeah, and then when you get into combat with it, they use Armor of Contempt, and now it goes from a 1-up save to a 0-up save. And just to give you a reference of, how unkillable this thing is, 5 Alaris with a Shield Captain, which I would argue is far and away our most killy unit, on average does 4 damage to it. Because you start with 32 attacks from the Alaris into the Dreadnought, you take sustained hits, and you spend a CP on Slayer of Nightmares. So 32 attacks with sustained hits, hitting on 2s, that's an average of 32 hits. Now you're wounding the Dreadnought on 4s, because of Slayer of Nightmares, and you're re-rolling all the failed wounds. So half of 32 is 16, so you get 16 wounds, and now you have 16 fails that you re-roll again, which will give you 8 more wounds for a total of 24 wounds that the Redemptor Dreadnought has to save. 24 wounds being saved on 2s is an average of 4 damage, which would be 8 damage, but the Dreadnought has -1 damage. So our unit of 500 points deals 4 damage into that Redemptor Dreadnought. Oh, and if you're thinking about shooting at it with our tank, which is -3 AP, well, would you look at that, it's standing behind cover now. So +1 from the stratagem, +1 from Armor of Contempt, +1 from cover. It is now at a -1 save against AP3, which means, you guessed it, it's saving on 2s. And yeah, he can do that combo every single turn for 2 command points, and you can do nothing about it. Well, except for Trajan. Trajan will ignore it depending on which rules you play with. GW actually just came out with a new, not an update, because it's for a specific tournament, so it doesn't count for Custodes in general. But for that tournament alone, nothing in the Custodes book can kill a Redemptor Dreadnought if they spend 2 CP on it. Nothing. And that just seems silly to me. On top of that, Space Marines just have a ton of units, and I'm sure there's some broken combo out there that people haven't discovered yet. And currently, when I go into Space Marine matchups, I'm just like, I don't fucking know if I can kill this thing, and I don't know if this guy runs, 12 inches in the opposite direction and then flies up into the air and scores 20 points before he lands. I just think Space Marines have a lot of tricks, a lot of units, and I just never feel quite confident going into the matchup, despite Custodes being known as, the killer of marine bodies. There just isn't a lot of normal marine bodies in the game, it's all dreadnoughts, it's all tanks, and when it finally is a normal marine body, it's for holding like an objective or scoring some points. And then you're like, yeah, I killed those guys, but it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think Space Marines currently is a yellow matchup, 10-10, it can go either way. It could sometimes be a 12-8 for Custodes. It could also be an 8-12 for Space Marines. I just don't feel confident going into the matchup that I have a good game plan to deal with it. Grey Knights. I don't have a lot to say here because I haven't seen anyone play Grey Knights in 10th edition yet. I say it's a yellow matchup, but I also say that we score it in our favor because the way that I understand that Grey Knights work is that they just don't want to interact with you, right? They don't want to charge you, they don't want to shoot you, they just want to stand at a distance, hold the point, and when you get too close, they fuck off, and then they do it again somewhere else. So I'm thinking against Custodes that Grey Knights don't really kill anything, which also means that we get to stand on primaries for most of the game. And yeah, they'll teleport around and max out secondaries. Can't really stop them from doing that, but in general, I think we win the game because they can't kill us while we stand on primary points. That being said, I have not had any experience playing against them or with them, or even seen someone play them in 10th edition, so I really truly do not know. Custodes! Yay! It's a skill matchup, I guess? I made the joke that their vision is based on movement. And the reason why I made that joke is that if you assume that both players bring roughly the same list, then I kind of feel like whoever charges first loses because, fight first. But then I was also like, well, we also have -1 damage, which really neuters the output. We also have -1 to hit karate, which even further neuters the output. And then I was like, does the one who actually has the most Alaris Terminators win? Because Alaris Terminators is the only infantry that can put out some decent shooting into Custodes. Because you'll have the reroll wound roll, because most likely there will be a character in that Custodes unit. And then I was like, well, actually, maybe that doesn't matter either. Maybe it's just like who plans out and draws the best secondaries, and I honestly don't know. I haven't played the mirror match before. I imagine it's mostly up to skill matchup and like, don't charge the other person, because if you do that, they fight first. I don't know for sure. Black Templars. I don't know a whole lot about these guys, but they can have access to all of the same tricks, units, and stratagems as normal Space Marines, as well as their own units such as Crusaders. For that reason alone, I think this goes from a 10-10 against normal Space Marines to a 15-15 or a 5-15 in favor of Black Templars, just because they have better units but the same tricks. Sisters of Battles, Nuns with Guns. I say this is a yellow matchup, 11-9 in favor of Custodes. They recently pulled out a couple of Grand Tournament wins with Sisters of Battle, but it was played by experienced and above average players. Therefore, what I'm saying when I say 11-9 matchup for me is that I'm going into a game with someone who's either experienced in playing Sisters of Battle, or they are above average players, which means they're just better than me. The only thing that I felt was like a true killer against Custodes was the Melta Sister Squad that gets infinite amount of miracles and can make an infinite amount of those miracles into 6s. That obviously means that the Melta becomes very scary when they just auto-hit, auto-wound, auto-deal enough damage. However, their indirect fire, which is another like strong point of Sisters of Battle, is not really scary against Custodes as long as you are forcing them to shoot indirect so you get the benefit of cover. It is d6 damage, but you're saving on 3s, and d6 damage can swing, and you can even use -1 damage to be even more safe if you wish to do so. But there is also some times when the d6 damage just doesn't, matter because they roll 5s and 6s, or they use miracle dice to do it. My point being, I don't think it's too bad of a matchup, but I can see it go both ways. I've only had a single play against them, a single game against them. It was an experienced player, but he was super rusty and haven't played. It was his first game this edition, so I can't say for sure that I had the appropriate experience into them. Adeptus Mechanicus. Beep boop. I have never played a game against them. Not in 9th edition, not in 10th edition. I have no clue what they can do. I've heard they're fairly killy, but that they die pretty easily. I don't feel confident giving a rating here. If I were to give them a rating, I would say a green matchup, maybe 14-6 in favor of Custodes. But I don't know, because the only people who are mad enough to play Adeptus Mechanicus right now are like really good players or people who've played them for a very long time. And I feel those kind of players could probably beat me, just because they know their army better than I do, and they're better players than me. Imperial Knights. I think that Imperial Knights run into the same problem as Chaos Knights, except that Chaos Knights can at least run through walls, but there are very clear targets for my big units of Custodes to go into. I like that very much. I get lots of attacks, I'm wounding on force with a stratagem, and taking down big knights is something I would be happy to do, because once I take down one big knight, there's only, 2 big knights left and then 3 or 4 small ones. It's very clear what I need to target and what I need to do to win. I say it's a green matchup, 15-5 in favor of Custodes. Imperial Guard, also known as Parking Lot Guard, which I'm not sure is the way they're played anymore, but from what I've understood, the only viable build for Imperial Guard are basically stand still and shoot your guns. And the best weapons for that is indirect. However, Guard indirect isn't super scary for Custodes because they're in cover. We'll be saving on freeze most of the time, and the OC of Imperial Guard going on an objective is not scary either, because one squad of Wardens with a character is OC 18 on the objective. So they can't really steal objectives from us, and they can't really kill us with indirect fire. So I think it's a green matchup, 14-6 in favor of Custodes. Whew, alright, that was a lot longer than I thought it would be to get through. I am sorry I end up going a little bit fast here at the end, but I don't have infinite time to record these videos, so I figured we would just speed up towards the end when I didn't have a lot to say about the matchups. So, let me know in the comments below what you think, and be sure to check out Happy Crumbing Wargaming, and our live stream this Thursday, November the 2nd. Until I see you again, I hope you have a wonderful time.